Well, welcome back all my YouTube browsers, and more especially to all the loyal subscribers that have now signed up to my channel to view more of my vintage and classic dirt bikes. Now in the next few videos I'm soon to post on my channel, we have some superb motocross classics to show you from the Terry Pickering Classic Off-Road Collection. Now Terry has some very unique machines in his collection, and we're going to start by showing you his quite rare 1971 360 Square Barrel Maico. Now this particular bike has been built by Terry's good friend Keith Ree. Now Keith put this bike together using original spare parts from Terry's project parts bins. Now naturally a few of the hard to find items had to be sourced from further afield, but eventually all the necessary bits were found to build this fantastic looking machine. Now the bike's builder, Keith Ree, is no stranger to these Maicos, and Keith actually rode for them back in the day, and so he seemed to be the perfect man to put together this superb looking German twin shocker. Now during the refurbishment of the frame, Keith told me that this was a bit of a chore to get right, between having to remove all the old paint and doing any repairs that were required, and then finally of course powder coating it in this extremely hard wearing black colour. Now of course also in 1979 Maico launched the big brother to this bike, the legendary 501, which was about as iconic as the 1981 490 Mega 2. But the 501 was an absolute brute of a bike, and was the biggest engine two-stroke of its time in that year. But this 360 version is a much nicer machine to ride. Now the motor of course is a single cylinder piston port two-stroke, which if I remember correctly back in the day put out about 36 horsepower. But when it came to building the motor for Terry's Maico, Keith just raided Terry's parts boxes, and surprisingly enough he found every single component he needed to build this 360 motor. And once again the Bing carburetor supplied all the fuel needed for this Square Barrel Maico. Now the other surprising thing about the build of this engine were that all the parts that Keith found to put this motor together were all period correct parts from 1971. But of course the bits and pieces weren't just thrown together to build an engine. Keith inspected, cleaned and refurbished each and every part as required, and when he was happy with the condition he put the parts together with of course new seals, bearings, etc., to finish with what is essentially a brand new Maico motor from 1971. But although the engine looks a lot bigger than it actually is, this is still a very nice and rideable 360 compared to its 500cc big brother. Now from what I can remember from 1971, the front suspension on these 71 bikes were pretty good, and okay, we've come a long way since then, whereby dirt bike suspension is now almost a science. But in their day these front forks performed well, and you could throw the 360 into any corner with decent feedback about how the front end was behaving. Now there wasn't much scope for tuning these front forks with regards to damping and rebound, but you could mess around with different spring rates and different weights of oil if you wanted to tune them a bit better. Now in this particular shot you can see that Terry was actually awaiting a front brake cable, and that's the reason the front brake cable was not shown in this particular shot. But for its day, these front suspension units on these 360 Square Barrel Maicos were decent enough suspension systems, and good enough for 1971. Now, back in 1971, the rear shocks fitted to these bikes, if I remember correctly, would have been a set of conies. Although in our particular case, as you can see, Terry has opted to go for a pair of these very good quality Hagen units, which of course are made right here in the UK. Now, these 360 Maicos had this huge rear sprocket to keep the gearing correct for that big 360 motor. Now, one of the parts that Terry couldn't locate for this bike was this rear chain guide, and despite his best efforts was unable to find an original item, and so bike builder Keith Ree had to manufacture this well engineered replacement. Now, there was another part that Terry never had for his 71 360 build, and that was a complete exhaust system. Because as you would expect, motorcycle shops aren't exactly overstocked with exhaust systems for 1971 Square Barrel Maicos. But nevertheless, there were suppliers in the USA who still had original pipes for this model, and so a full system was ordered, then delivered, and then painted in this fine matte black colour scheme. And there's a very nice sound comes out that lovely tailpipe. Now, this original fiberglass fuel tank once again underwent a full restoration with a complete rub down, then repaint, and of course a set of brand new Maico decals were then also added. But these 360 motors needed a decent sized tank to complete even the longest race moto, because let's face it, these are off-road bikes and not your general commute to work motorcycles, and economy is not really a factor, and it was all about making horsepower. Now, naturally, and as per the rest of the bike's refurbishment, this very nice seat was totally remade, and as you can see, fits very well alongside the rest of this excellent machine built by Keith Ree. Now, of course, the original seat base and padding was used to build this new seat, and Keith obviously went for a brand new seat cover to complete the build of this fantastic looking machine. Now, the handlebars are originals from 1971 and are in keeping with the rest of the build of the bike. The rest of the controls, including these Magura levers and throttle gasser, are period correct items from the day, although Terry was currently waiting, as I mentioned earlier, for a new front brake cable to finish off his brand new bike when I took these pictures. But more or less all the other controls are period correct items from 1971. Now, although you're looking at a video of this bike at the moment, you can of course see this bike in the flesh, so to speak, if you visit the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show in February of 2020, where you can view this and a few of Terry's other fantastic classic race bikes on the Hagen shock stand at the show. Now, back in 1971, journalists and off-road bike testers who tried these 360 bikes out back in the day had nothing but praise for these Square Barrel Maicos, quoting passages like they were blindingly fast, and at the time they also mentioned that it was one of the best bikes they had ridden to that date. Now, of course, these bikes were elevated to almost iconic status when the likes of Aki Johnson, Adolf Wheel and Willie Bower threw their legs over these superb machines. Legendary off-road journalist Rick Simon also wrote of his experiences on the 360 bike that these Square Barrel Maicos were so superior to what was available in 1971 that it was almost like cheating when you threw your leg over one of these bikes at a race event. They were that good. But if you ever raced, or indeed still race, one of these Square Barrel Maicos, then you are a very lucky man indeed. You just don't see these 360s on the racetrack these days. And for me personally, this is the first one I have actually seen in the flesh, so to speak. They really are a very rare machine. So there you have it, the very first machine of 5 bikes I intend to show you here on my video channel from the Terry Pickering Classic Dirt Bike Collection. Now Terry has in his compendium of old classic dirt bikes an absolute goldmine of the very best and unique machines that raced from back in the day, and I have been privileged to obtain full access to his collection and hope to share more of Terry's machines here on my YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So if you don't want to miss out, please subscribe to my channel using the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of your YouTube viewer screen. Okay, next up, another machine from Terry's collection, a lovely 1979 Cotton EMX 250, so make sure you don't miss it. This video was brought to you in association with Wolfsport, the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website or give them a call for more details.